Well, welcome back everyone to another episode of Meet the Author. Today I have Mads Rafferty here with me, and we're talking about her newest book, Heir of Broken Fate. I'm so excited that you are here today talking about this book. This is your first book that you've published. That's like a huge deal in itself. Let's just first off introduce everyone who maybe doesn't know who you are. Maybe they haven't seen some of your incredible things. Just kind of introduce who is Mads to everybody.
Hi, thank you for having me on. This is really great. I'm really excited to talk about this. Heir of Broken Fate is my debut novel, almost turning 25, and I love reading. That's about it. That's like a real quick summary.
And you live in Australia, correct?
Yes, I'm an Aussie author. I did live in America actually for 3 years and moved back when COVID hit. But yeah, I am an Aussie author.
Where'd you live in when you were in America?
LA.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you like it, or were you ready? Were you ready to get out of there by the time you had to leave?
I was ready to leave by the time COVID hit. I was excited to come back. Yeah, I was done.
I can see that. It can be a lot for people. People who are from LA are like, no, it's incredible. But the few times that I visited, I think it's beautiful and there's a lot of fun things, but it's a lot of people. I can see how you're like, all right, time to get on home.
I want to go back to the good beaches of Australia. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, first and foremost, I just want to say, like, congrats on you publishing this book. I mean, that's incredible. It's a huge thing. I know you're really adamant, and you talk about it on TikTok how if you were talking to your younger self, you wouldn't believe that you, let alone read a lot, but that you published your own book. How was that like? Deciding, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to publish a novel. What was that process like for you?
Once I want something, I'm like a dog with a bone. I definitely go after it. So as soon as I started writing this book, there was never any time where I doubted if I would publish the book or not. Which is strange in itself. I just wrote it and I was like, no, I know that people are gonna like it. And I taught myself everything. I don't know anyone in the industry. I didn't even have a book friend, so I went in completely blind in this process. Googled a lot of things, went on YouTube for a lot, and it was all self-taught the entire process. But yeah, I think my younger self is flabbergasted that I wrote a book and that I read.
That's incredible, especially that you taught yourself everything. I mean, it's one thing, to be an indie author and to be self-published, but just again, not having like other book friends or, having to basically start from scratch and be like, okay, I'm teaching myself everything. That's incredible. And I think you did a phenomenal job in just, again, publishing this book, but then also the fact that it's done so well and everything. And you have more things to come. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But for Heir of Broken Fate, kind of walk people through if maybe they've never picked this book up before, haven't seen any of your TikTok videos, what this book is about and what people could kind of expect reading this novel of yours.
I know that I wrote it, but I'm horrible at summarizing my own book. I don't know what it is. So I will read the synopsis just so I can save everyone a lot of ums and really awkward pauses. So I've got the book here. I'm literally just going to read the back. It will save us a lot of time. 150 years ago, the Fae race vanished, along with their magic and creatures. With the fallen Faelands, humans were soon to follow as corruption spread throughout the realm. Heir to the throne, Delilah Covington is forced to watch her people suffer under the sinful hands of her father, the king, while she herself suffers his cruel hand. Delilah has longed for change, her prayers going unanswered until she discovers salvation. Fae are alive. In desperation, Delilah flees her home and crosses the border in hopes that the Fae will save her people, yet she isn't the only one who needs help. Caught in a web of lies and riddles, Delilah's only chance at hope is Nox, one of the irritating yet frustratingly charming Fae kings. Together they'll need to unravel the many mysteries to bring people to both the oppressed people or damn them all. And that's Heir of Broken Fate.
Exciting.
Yeah, so it's got Fae, it's got all my favorite tropes. It's got enemies to lovers, slow burn, forced proximity, one bed trope, and elemental magic.
I love the elemental magic. It's an incredible book. Again, it starts off strong. They don't think like the Fae race has disappeared and everything, and kind of the curfew and all these things that are, ongoing at the beginning of the book, and then getting to find Nox and everything. And when he came in, you're like, okay, hi.
Yeah.
one of
I
those book
love
boyfriends that you
intros.
just know that you're gonna love and everything.
Yeah.
So exciting for people who haven't picked up this book. Definitely one to read and recommend. Definitely a fantasy romance book. What was your kind of inspiration that you decided that this was the story that you were gonna write? That you were just like, okay, had you been thinking about it for a while, or did it just kind of come to you and you're like, okay, this is the story that I want to do?
I mean, everyone has different beliefs, but this definitely felt very divine to me, which is also mentioned in the book. There's divine magic and dark magic. But this is the whole story. I during COVID, because I used to model and do acting. So then when COVID came, all of that was taken away. So I just read. I read 300 books in a year. I was reading a book a day, or sometimes even like a book and a half a day. I was absolutely obsessed. And because I read so many books so quickly, I picked up on things a lot quicker with writing. And I think that's why it was so easy for me, because I haven't even graduated high school. I'm a high school dropout, and I hated reading when I was younger. And I think that's really like the key of why I was able to write this book. And I started having ideas. I've always been a very creative person, and I put that more into the creative arts of like photography and modeling and acting and creating characters with movies and TV shows. And I would always daydream different scenarios, like when you go to bed at night, like you're thinking, like you're putting yourself in the main character of your favorite TV shows and everything. um so when I started reading, I absolutely just fell in love with the entire process, and I started having more ideas, more imaginative scenarios in my mind. So then at one point I wrote half a book of a college hockey romance. And then completely scrapped it. I will always love sports romances because they're amazing, especially hockey. But definitely not the genre for me. So after that process, I was like, I don't really want to write again because I just scrapped this entire book. So I said, okay, every time you have a book idea, just write it down on your phone on your notes. So every time I would have an idea, I'd just write it down. And I always thought that there was individual book ideas.
Mhm.
And then about a year after that, I had an idea and I wrote it down. And then I was like, oh my God, I have a lot of ideas on my notes. So I finally read through it after a year and realized almost like in order, it was an entire book series. It wasn't different ideas. There were tropes, there was chapters, there were scenes, there was things that the characters were going to say. And I was like, oh my God, this is an amazing story. So that weekend, I spent the entire weekend plotting out 4 books. And then Monday, I started writing, and I wrote the book within 8 weeks.
That's incredible. That's awesome.
Yep.
So would you say since you plotted it, I know there's like a saying in the bookish community for authors that you're either a plotter or a pantser. Would you say that you're definitely more like a plotter? You have to have this plot base and then you kind of do everything in between, or do you sometimes do the pantsing side where you just kind of like write whatever you come back? Like what you just sit down and write and write and write and then you come back to it later and you're like, okay, this is what I was doing.
I would kind of say I'm a little bit in the middle. I really hate being limited. So when I say plot, it's the overall tropes, and I know the overall plot of what's going to happen, but I don't have chapter breakdowns. I don't have an overall book breakdown. I literally have word, and I go, I want this to happen, I want this to happen, I want this to happen. And then I rearrange it of what order it needs to be written in, and then it's just a clean slate canvas. And sometimes, like, even as I'm writing book 2, I'll get chapter ideas for book 3, so then I'll quickly write it down. And then when I start the book process again, I'm like, okay, yeah, I love that, and I'll put it in order. But in between those really big plot moments, I have no clue what's going to happen. It just comes.
How do you kind of separate? So you just said like while you're writing book 2, but you think of something that could happen in book 3. How do you kind of separate the two to be like, okay, no, this is what I want specifically here, instead of kind of like getting ahead of yourself? I feel like because you already know, okay, like no, I'm going to wait and save that. How do you kind of differentiate the kind of different ones for setting aside for what you want for certain books?
It's moments, and it feels, I don't know. I think because my brain compartmentalizes certain aspects, it does that with the book. So it's very much like a Mac with folders, and it just has book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, and then there's different, it's like a tree in my mind, and then you have different aspects of the relationship dynamics, the character development. There's certain things that I'm like, no, like this has to happen in this book. And I think because when I outline and plot the book, I also know what I want to happen with their character development. So you can kind of get a feel for when you have those ideas, you're like, no, that's going to happen in this book because of this reason.
Okay, that makes more sense. And you can
Yeah.
say yes or no for this, but for, you said you've plotted 4 stories. For these 4 stories, are we going to mainly be following this like main group of characters here? Or are we going to start to kind of like introduce, how sometimes you have like the first 2 books follow, a certain couple or something, and then it kind of changes. Do you have an idea yet so far? Can you say anything about that? Or if you can't, you can tell me no.
It will be following Delilah, but it will also be, there will be new characters introduced, but it will always be from Delilah's perspective.
Awesome. And I know a lot of people, especially, once you go and you start to talk about the books and people are reading it out there and putting it into the world, they start talking about it. And a lot of people like dual POVs. Do you think you would ever write kind of both perspectives, or do you think you just want to write like from Delilah's point of view? You don't ever want to kind of add in someone else's?
I will say it is just Delilah's perspective at this point in time for book 2 and
Okay.
book 1. That is all I
Okay.
will say, because I so badly want to spoil my own book, but I cannot do that. So
Uh,
that's it.
don't we'll leave it at that. We don't want to
Yeah.
accidentally spoil anything. So, do you have maybe not without spoiling, the book or anything, but maybe like a favorite moment that you can kind of remember, or like a quote or something that people could, maybe get like a teaser? I know you're incredible at making, your TikToks and everything. I feel like you are one of those authors that you are really good about branding your book and kind of getting it out there and letting people see it. You're making all those like fantasy romance suggestions and you're putting it with some of the, other books, and you're sticking yours in there. Do you have maybe a scene or a moment that's not super spoily that you'd be like, okay, here's what you can expect when you go into this book that could maybe get people a little bit excited for it?
Oh, that's hard because I like every scene. I will say that I will read a quote and also the dedication, because it definitely gives, I feel like, the vibe. So a quote is exquisite to see that something so beautiful, shrouded and hidden by darkness, can still shine bright. And then the dedication is, to my younger self, there is always hope to be found. So it's definitely playing on those aspects of light and dark, not only within a magic system, but within ourselves. And it goes into just emotions and feelings, and just because you have a bad feeling or your past maybe doesn't take away from your beauty. And that's the overall message that I like of the book.
I think that's awesome. And I think, yeah, that represents things perfectly. And well, I like that quote that you picked. It was a really good one. How for your writing process then, when you're sitting down and writing your book, as you're actively writing book 2 right now, do you like to write things at home, or do you ever find yourself, going to like a coffee shop or a bookstore, or things that you feel that you do better writing somewhere else that's maybe not at home?
I write best at home and in silence. I get distracted so easily, and I have younger sisters as well. And if they're like upstairs or around me, I'm like, my mind just goes like, just can't do it. Has to be silence. I've tried to do it with music, and I think it helps for some chapters, but no, it has to be silent. I have to have a lot of light, and I definitely write best at home.
Okay, okay. I've Most people that I've interviewed have said that they like to write best at home, but there's been a few that they're like, no, I love to go to coffee shops and I write at the airport and I people watch, and I'm like, props to you, because I'm the same, watching 100 different things, and I don't know how I would even focus to be
Yeah,
able to do
and
one
I
thing or
love
another.
people watching. I love people watching. I wish I could. I truly wish I could, because then I would get out of the house a lot more. But my brain just doesn't function like that.
Totally understand. So for we'll take a half of a break from your book. Not writing your book or editing, or the things it takes to publish a novel. What do you like to do in your free time?
Read. I feel like that's so generic. for an author, but definitely reading. I also have an adorable Labrador that I love, and I spend time with her. I also have a boyfriend that I love, that I spend time with him, which is great. But I still do acting sometimes. So sometimes I'll be doing castings, but majority of the time I'm just reading.
Big reader.
I
Do you
love
have a
reading.
favorite book so far this year that you've read?
Absolutely. And I think this goes without saying that it is everyone's favorite. Fourth Wing is definitely up there. Absolutely love Fourth Wing. It was just great vibes, and it was such an easy read for a fantasy read as well. And I think it's one of those books that if you don't like fantasy and you're new to fantasy, it gets you into fantasy because it's an easy fantasy read. And then I also just recently read Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber, I believe it is. Love that series. So they're my two contenders.
I haven't read Once Upon a Broken Heart yet. I was holding out a little bit closer to the third book coming out because I was just
I
like,
wish I did that.
I just get a little bit closer, but I've read her other series, Caravan. I loved that, but just had to ask, as I see you obviously, give a lot of recommendations again of other books that you like to read too. So and your shelf behind you obviously has a ton of books on it also. That's incredible. So
Yeah.
figured I had to ask. So back to your books and, your writing process and everything, especially, with this being your first book. And you said you kind of started getting ideas and writing during COVID and everything. And obviously people couldn't go outside and do as much stuff as nowadays. Where were you getting your inspiration from? Would you find I know some people have said music or TV shows or, where do you get your inspiration from when it comes to writing these characters and for your books and just in general?
This is such a tricky question to ask because I actually don't know. It sounds so weird, but when I write and sometimes if I get stuck or I feel like it's slowing down or I don't know exactly what I want to happen next, I close my eyes and I picture what I just wrote and I see it as a movie, and then the next scene just kind of happens in my mind. I'm like, I love that, and then I'll write it. So I'm not sure where my little brain is getting the inspiration from. Not sure where the imagination is picking it up from. I'm sure it's from childhood favorites. I'm sure it's from TV shows and movies that I absolutely love. But yeah, writing and also I have a beautiful view of the harbor and a forest. So when I write, I like just taking a little breather and looking out. And I don't know, I just let my imagination just run wild. And I usually like it 9 times out of 10. So then I write it.
That's awesome. Do you have a set schedule when it comes to writing that you're like, okay, I need to wake up, a certain time and write for this long? Or is it kind of just, again, when the inspiration strikes that you're sitting there and you're thinking all of a sudden, you're like, that would be fantastic. Or I need to pull it out and start writing.
I wish I had a schedule. I am very much a feeler. So I try and write every single day. Sometimes I'm dragging my feet and my brain if I didn't sleep well the night before, sometimes it just feels completely empty up there. And then other times I'll write 10,000 words and I'll absolutely just be engrossed in the story. But it's definitely depending on how I feel and how my body feels and how my mind feels. So there's not a set schedule. It's just a roller coaster.
That's fair. Okay. If you have your book, I know you have it next to you. Mine's on the Kindle, so you can't see the cover and everything quite as well, but you have the colors, especially if you want to hold it up a little bit closer to the camera. I have to ask, where did you get your inspiration for this cover / how do you pick the cover art that you have for this book? How did you go about, choosing that? Because it's stunning, obviously. I mean, I know that's the thing that people always talk about, how incredible this cover is. How did you go about picking that?
This was actually very intuitive. For anyone that's read the book, you might have picked up on a little bit. This is also a little bit of a teaser. There's very much talk about psychic abilities and energy and movement within it. And I'm quite a spiritual person. This cover definitely came very intuitively. I can't tell you more about it. I love tarot cards, and I was shuffling my tarot cards, and then I got this whole image in my mind, and then a card flew out, and it was the Two of Swords, which is a lady that's sitting down on a chair, and she has water in the background, and she has swords crossed over, and she's blinded, and I was like, oh my god, that's what I just saw in my mind. That's absolutely amazing. Um, and I always knew the colors were a little bit more strategic. Because when I look at my fantasy shelf, it's all very dark. And I know that when I'm scrolling on TikTok and I see someone's bookshelf, you know instantly when someone has ACOTAR. Like it just stands out. I think it's one of the most like popular fantasy books that stand out on people's shelves because of the rainbow. And I said, well, how can I stand out? And white. I picked white because you very rarely see fantasy books that are white. They're usually 90% of the time black. And I also liked it because it is an Easter egg about the magic that goes on and the duality of dark versus light magic.
Mm-hmm.
And there is also a lot of Easter eggs in the cover as well, which I really like. A lot of Easter egg colors as well.
Love that. I think it's absolutely stunning. So I didn't know. Did you like pick the cover art and everything? I know it came to your head and everything. Were you the one
Yeah.
that, created this? Did you Photoshop it and everything, or did you have someone who created this cover?
No, I have my book cover designer and she's absolutely amazing and so talented. So I just went to her and I actually, gosh, I hope no one sees the light of day of it. I photoshopped, but I photoshopped this just very poorly, with different images, and I sent it to her and I said, "Please try and create this and make it pretty." And she did. She made it absolutely stunning, and it's just like a beautiful cover.
It is, again, the whole thing is stunning. So I just, it's one of my questions I have to ask, but especially for like, again, you said fantasy books. I feel like for fantasy books, especially, like, it's so bad as a reader. You shouldn't, we always say don't judge a book by its cover, but it's
You
so
should.
hard not to. Like, that's one of those big things that people are going to, look at a cover and they're going to either be like, I want to read this or I'm not interested in that. So I think, you nailed it by making one that's people looking at that and they're like, okay, I want to read that and everything. So had to ask where the inspiration comes from. Love that you have, the story, and especially the fact that you were sitting there thinking about it and then you like saw the vision and then the card and everything and it had this. That's
Yeah,
incredible and just leads you to, it was meant to be kind of situation. Have you made the cover
absolutely.
yet for the second book, or you're not that far yet that you haven't kind of figured out what you're looking for?
It's in the works, but it's not created yet. I've definitely got a few ideas. But for anyone that has read the book as well, there's so many Easter eggs in the cover that people don't realize. I feel like maybe once they read book 2, they'll look at the cover and go, "Oh my god." Fingers crossed.
I love
Um,
that. I
but
love
yeah.
that you did that on purpose, that you were like, all right, I'm planting this. I'm planting these seeds and I want you to come back and notice.
Absolutely. I learned from the queen herself, Taylor Swift, how to create Easter eggs. And I love Easter eggs. I said it while I wrote this book. I said if someone just comes to me or there's a moment where people are like highlighting lines and coming up with theories about Easter eggs and everything, I've made it. That will make my day. I love that so much.
Everyone's going to come watch this video and then they're going to go back through their book and they're going to be like, all right, looking for all these theories. And now
Yeah.
what can we figure out? What can we expect? That's awesome. You're going to have people in a frenzy over this. Now that you said that, they're going to be looking for it.
There's a lot of Easter eggs. There's a lot.
That's exciting. For your writing, do you ever feel like that you put yourself maybe or people around you kind of as character inspiration, that they found their way into book 1 is obviously already out, but especially, writing book 2? Do you ever feel like that's happening, or do you kind of just keep your character separate and you don't really put actual people in your life into these stories?
Yes and no. I would say it's more so myself because I once heard a quote that said, "Write what you know," and I absolutely agree. Obviously, we don't know about magic because, unfortunately, we don't have it or possess it. Um, but I definitely put more of myself into the character and different aspects of it. I also knew going in that I wanted to touch on mental health topics, so I put that in there. And I would like to say no, that I didn't get inspiration from people, but I did an interview recently where I was like, hey, no, I'm lying. There definitely is. And as I was speaking, I realized, so my mum growing up was my best friend. And in the book, Delilah's best friend is Easton. And my mum, we like to call her a chocoholic. She's obsessed with chocolate. And I didn't even put two and two together until I like started editing. I was like, oh, hang on, I've made Easton obsessed with chocolate, which is Delilah's best friend, which is quite funny. And then without realizing it, my mum is a working psychic medium and she's obsessed with mermaids. And I made the mermaid psychic. So there's just those little things that are obviously very subconscious that I didn't do on purpose, but obviously I did draw inspiration from my life, just a little bit, just a little bit.
That's awesome. I feel like it makes sense, for a lot of times that, again, what you said, that quote, I think is fantastic. Write what you know. So even, you weren't thinking about it, but you were subconsciously, putting a few things in there. I think that's special, especially now that you can go back and be like, all right, mom, Easton loves chocolate because of you, and my mermaid is
Yeah,
psychic because of you. And I'm sure that's special for her too, to like see the connections and everything, and the fact that you did put that in your story. That's probably like means something special to her.
absolutely.
That's awesome. So I don't know how much, I know we kind of talked a little bit beforehand about the next book. Do we have an idea if it is coming out this year, or would it be maybe 2024 that we're looking down the line?
So it's early 2024, and fingers crossed that it's going to be March.
Okay,
Fingers crossed. Fingers
exciting,
crossed. But I
exciting.
will say I am going to be doing ARC signups online. So follow my TikTok because that is where I'll be posting all the news, and there will be a sign up online, hopefully around like December, end of the year.
Perfect. Perfect. That's so exciting. Well, is there anything else that you want me to touch on, or that you want to talk about, getting people excited for this book a little bit more that maybe we didn't talk about today? Again, this is like your debut. I think it's incredible. And the fact that you did so much without really, having friends in the industry, just the fact that you were able to not only write a book, but stick it out all the way through and then publish it. I mean, I blows my mind constantly anytime I ever interview an author. I'm just like, you get all the praise first and foremost for like writing a book, putting it into the world, knowing people are going to read it. Is there anything else that maybe you want to talk about that maybe people don't necessarily think, or that you want people to know?
Oh gosh. Um oh my gosh, I don't even know. I don't know where to start. I honestly think that the Easter egg thing is the biggest thing because I will say every single character that is introduced in Heir of Broken Fate and throughout all the books are introduced for a reason, and everything that is done like meticulously. Every line, like what people say, there's a reason and there's a purpose for it. And hopefully, I really do think that when book two comes out, a lot of things are going to start to make sense. There's going to be a lot of revelations. And even while writing book one, I just had this overwhelming feeling that book two is going to be absolutely loved and it's going to be people's favorite book out of the series. Um, Fingers crossed that feeling is right. But yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of revelations in book two that is absolutely just going to hook people in for the entire series. And it's going to make you go back and look at book one a little differently. So if you have read book one now and then you go and read book two, I do have a feeling a lot of people are going to go back and go, wait, how did I need to go and reread this book. So hopefully I blow a lot of people's minds.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I think that's one of my favorite things too as a reader, is like when you, especially, you go in blind. And I feel like we've reached a time period with like fantasy books, especially, that like no one trusts so many things now. Like I've learned from, not only SJM, but so many other books now, like never trust the childhood best friend or whatever, like the first love interest. It's like there's so many things that have like been ingrained in us now, like as readers, that we're like, can we trust you actually? That if you
Yeah.
like, you do have a character that comes in and like everything's good and fine, you're like, when are you going to betray me? When are you
Yeah.
going to stab me in the back, or just, those moments. So I definitely like that you have an idea already to set things up. So then again, when people get to book two, they're going to go back to book one and be like, I knew it, or how did I not see this? Things like that. I think that's a really fun moment as a reader. And I know, again, you read a ton of books that you can also, so
Yeah.
you know what that feeling is like, to being like, oh, they got us again.
Yeah. And I just want to create that moment. I just want to create that like aha light bulb moment in people's minds. And hopefully they'll love it and enjoy it. It does touch on I know book one already touches on some heavy topics of like grief, anxiety, dissociation. And book two and book three and book four will definitely keep touching on serious topics. And just, I mean, I'm hoping that even for some people, they read it and maybe they're struggling or they can relate to it just on any level. I just love that aspect as well because there's so many different layers to books where it's either like an escapism or you just need a distraction from your life or you need to pick me up. So hopefully the book does that for some people.
No, I think that's awesome. And like you said a little bit earlier on in the interview, that, you know, part of why you this way is because you wanted to also important mental health topics and things, you know, like anxiety and stuff that everyone, you know, feels and experiences. Most people
Yeah.
have these things going on, you know, and whether they're picking up a book to not experience that or, you know, whatever's going on with people's lives, you have no idea who is going to be picking this up and reading it. So I think that's awesome. And it's incredible that you have dedicated part of, you know, writing this to touch on all those subjects so people realize that they're not alone and that even, you know, if it's in a fantasy world, that it's not in this world, but, you know, it's still something that people are dealing with. And I think that's
Yeah.
incredible that you decided to include that and, you know, touch on those topics because I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, where can people find you first and foremost? Because that is obviously a big deal. People want to be able to, especially watch your TikTok videos. They're incredible. Lots of
Yeah.
good recommendations and like aesthetic videos for this. I know that was like how I found you at first was an aesthetic video was like for this book. And I was like, okay, like I'm in.
Yeah.
Where can people find you the best on your social media?
Definitely TikTok and Instagram. It's just my name, Mads Rafferty. I believe Instagram has a dot between Mads and Rafferty though. But yeah, you can find me on TikTok and Instagram. It's the easiest way to gain access and see what I'm doing. And I hope people continue liking all the videos that I post and all the updates as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being willing to come on here today to talk about not only, again, this first book that you published, but all the exciting things to come and get everyone so excited for the Easter eggs that they're going to find. I think we're going to send people on like a mass hunt after this. Like everyone's just going to be going back
Hopefully.
through and digging, like, all right, tabbing this, tabbing that, tabbing this, and on the lookout for what's to come. That's exciting. And I'm again, just thank you so much for coming on here today.
And thank you for having me. This was so much fun. I love talking about my book.
Yes, that's awesome. And you guys make sure that you are subscribed to me for all future author interviews. A lot of fun and exciting ones coming up here soon. And until next time, thanks, guys.
Bye.